Okay, Baltimore City Council, Judiciary. Oh, yeah. We're live. Liam. He's on. Is he on right now? Yeah, the red light's not on. The man. All right, and that's the rest of it. All right, perfect. Okay, this is Baltimore City Council Judiciary and Legislative Investigations Committee. We're here today for City Council Bill 18-0223, Equity Assessment Program. This hearing is being televised live on Comcast Channel 25 and is also viewable on charmtv.tv/watch-live. I'm joined by, to my far left, Vice Chair of the Committee, Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark from the 14th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To her right, Councilman Robert Stokes from the 12th District, member of the committee. To his right, Councilman Brandon Scott from the 2nd District, member of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To my far right is Councilman John Bullock from the 9th District, member of the committee. To his left is Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 9th District, member of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And also joining us is City Council President Bernard C. Jack Young. To my immediate right is Matt Peters, staff to the committee. We have Rebecca Tabb, who is General Counsel for the City Council. To her left is Liam Davis from the Council President's Office, Legislative Affairs. We also have Karan Banks representing Mayor Catherine Pugh joining us today. Couple quick notes. First, if you have a cell phone, please turn it to off or vibrate or silent or something else that does not make noise. That's one thing that we ask. If you are testifying at any point today, I ask that you say your agency and your name and speak clearly into the microphone like this because this is being televised on TV. With that, we've also been joined by Council President Young's Legislative Director, Kara Kunst, and with that, I'd like to turn it over to Councilman Brandon Scott, Chief Sponsor of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. This legislation is critically important for the city and the future of the city. We know that Baltimore has a horrible history of being a city of inequity. We know that first and foremost to refute that, to change that, to move forward in a city that promotes equity in everything that we do, that first has to start with city government. And we appreciate the work that planning and other agencies have begun to do around the lens of equity. But what we want to make sure here in this council through this legislation that no matter how long any of us are here, that every single thing that the city of Baltimore does with taxpayer dollars will be done through a lens of equity that's fair and equal to everyone and promoting everyone's benefit. That's what we have to do. We cannot allow the systems that have been in place in Baltimore for far too long. We know that this body and this building of City Hall has been complicit in the inequity and spreading it throughout the city of Baltimore. So it's time that we display leadership and try to start the train moving to get that corrected. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman, and thank you for your leadership on this important area. We are going to start off with the Department of Planning. And if you could come up to the podium when I call the agency, please, and thank you. Oh, never mind. You can sit.
Oh.
Thank you.
Are you sure?
Yes, yeah. I'm 100% sure. Yes, ma'am.
I'm fine standing.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Smith, Assistant Director for the Department of Planning. My focus is on equity, engagement, and communications. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the Equity Assessment Program. This is a bill that is very important. We're glad to be a part of, perhaps being part of the thought leadership around the discussion and direction of these efforts across city government. I wanted to start by giving a little bit of background around the equity work that has been happening in the Department of Planning to date, and then conclude with kind of our Planning Commission's recommendations on this bill specifically. So before the uprising in 2015, the Department of Planning had already kind of been initiating internal equity training. At first, the genesis was within our food policy team. They wanted to make sure that they had historical context around inequities, not just in the food context, but broadly to inform their work. And after initiating that internal training, they realized this could also be a benefit to the broader staff body. So the staff also participated in equity training, and that was something that led people to think we need something to sustain this conversation in a meaningful way, and that's where the Equity and Planning Committee was born. So it's really important to note that this was driven at the staff level, and they met regularly for about 2.5 years, continually educating themselves about what constitutes equity within the municipal framework. They were looking at what other jurisdictions were doing in Washington State, in King County, Seattle, also looking at what was happening in Portland, Oregon, Minneapolis, and just trying to get a better sense of what can be done in our agency with our jurisdiction to be more conscious of equity, and how can we revisit our way of doing business to be more equitable in outcomes. So the conclusion of that 2.5-year process was an equity action plan, again, staff-driven, staff assembled. It is not something that is written and done. It's a living document that's continuously being kind of reflected upon for its adequacy and its direction. But it's given a foundation for our agency to have ongoing conversations about 5 key areas. One, what are our internal policies, just kind of the informal way of doing business, the things that are generally not codified in a handbook, but just how you go about doing things. Are they sensitive to equity? Also, quite plainly, how are we letting people know about opportunities within our agency? Are we making sure that our pipeline can be as diverse as possible by expressing, advertisement about our internship, fellowship, related opportunities in a way that could cast a wider net? And particularly, looking closely at the institutions already in Baltimore City. Do we have strong enough relationships with the universities that have planning programs like Morgan and Maryland? Do we have strong enough relationships with other institutions in the city that may not have planning programs specifically, but can offer some type of scholarship and insight that we lack in our office that could be an opportunity for us to expand our capacity? So, those are 2 areas. What we've probably received the most public awareness around is our efforts to analyze our capital investment program to see if our CIP dollars are being distributed in an equitable way. So we had an opportunity to partner with a fellow from Morgan State University who was in our office last summer to do a very kind of cursory preliminary analysis of our capital dollars. And we saw that there was opportunity to perhaps develop some type of precise guidance around equity as it pertains to the capital budget program, and something that we've been working with all the agencies that participate directly with planning through the capital budget process with is developing some type of equity tool or instrument that can be utilized across agencies so that when they're submitting their portfolio of requests, they can be sensitive to equity at the outset, not just upon when we receive it as planning staff and are looking at it in a more comprehensive way. The 4th area that we've really been focusing on is engagement itself. We've had 2 citywide rules or plans rather, that came before the public for comment this year. That includes the Baltimore Green Network Plan, as well as the sustainability plan. So both of those efforts were opportunity to kind of create a baseline for what outreach can look like moving forward, because in many ways across agencies, we are doing public outreach, but it's not always in a systematic way. It can vary even within one agency from project to project. So we're trying to create a baseline so that we can have guidance within our own agency so that we can measure, are we doing it better next time? So one of the things that we're really proud that we launched this time is a platform called Civic Comment, and it allows people to make comment directly within the document that's being reviewed by the public, but it also gives the opportunity for the public to see what other citizens are raising as concerns. It's a more transparent public comment process. So that's something that we're continuously trying to refine is our engagement efforts, but also just our general awareness building about what our agency does, because we feel that's related to equity too. If people don't know what your agency does, what its jurisdiction is, and how it impacts them, it's very hard for them to interface with you in a productive way. So we did a series of pop-ups across the city that were all about educating people about planning, kind of the tools available and what we do within our agency. And it was really important for us to reach out to folks we don't always interact with. We do have a circulation list of roughly 9,000 people for our e-newsletter, but those are often people that have a higher level of engagement. We wanted to reach out to communities that perhaps have planning concerns but would not have described them that way to explain who we are. So I would say the fifth part was that there's also city policies that impact planning. So we were trying to also kind of do some research on how we can work with our partners, particularly the implementing agencies, to figure out how we can be more equitable in our performance there. So that begs the question, what is equity to us? So equity is, and within the context of the bill at issue, is not yet defined, and I believe some amendments will work to do so. But one of the things that we were looking for was a framework to guide our conversation and our efforts around equity. So we have the Office of Sustainability, which is a part of the Department of Planning, and the Office of Sustainability is a member of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, and that means we as a city are a member of that network. So these are professionals that are thinking about equity within the context of the urban environment and also within the frame of sustainability. So they have an equity lens that we've been utilizing, and it analyzes structural equity, procedural equity, distributional equity, and transgenerational equity. And just to briefly expand upon what those mean, structural is what historic advantages or disadvantages have affected a population, particularly within the community of Baltimore. Procedural equity, how are residents who have been historically excluded from planning processes, as it pertains to our agency, how are they being authentically included into our planning, implementation, and evaluation? And then distributional equity, which really looks at geographic distribution of our resources and our presence. And as we know, this is a city that has been historically segregated by race. So in many ways, when you're looking at distributional equity, you're also looking at racial distribution as well. And then transgenerational equity is a challenging one. It's even reflected in this room. Are we placing undue burdens on future generations of Baltimoreans? It's very rare that someone who's 15 years old is in the decision-making table for taxes that they will be responsible for 30 years from now. So we want to think about how can we authentically integrate young adults and young people into our planning processes, because the types of decisions we make at the planning level do have generational impacts, and we want to make sure we're sensitive to that in real time. And our 21st Century School program and the adjacent Inspire planning process has given us a perfect platform to work with children, faculty at the school, as well as the parents and the surrounding community. So that's one of our, I think, initial opportunities to really be mindful of transgenerational equity. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of that history of kind of what's happening at the Department of Planning, how we're thinking about this. By no means do I think we have it all figured out. We are plodding through in our own way, but I think there's commitment there, there's energy there, and there's a willingness to work with all of our partner agencies assembled to think through how this can be tackled through this bill in a way that makes all of our work more impactful for the residents of Baltimore City. So I just wanted to move to our staff report. I will not give you all the details because I know many of you.
Ms. Smith?
Oh, sorry.
I know that you have some recommendations in there, and you've been working closely with Councilman Scott and the mayor's office and the law department. I'm going to ask that we not talk about those recommendations right now, but we will get to that, of course.
Not a problem. So I guess that's all I wanted to share for now. Just wanted to reiterate our commitment to equity before this process and also after this process, and that we know that from our perspective, the inequity was planned, so it's going to have to be just as intentionally and thoughtfully unplanned. And I think that's really important for us to realize. We didn't get here overnight, so we're not going to get to a new place, but I'm excited at the opportunity, and thank you for the opportunity to have me speak before the body.
Thank you, and thank you for all the great work you're doing. Baltimore Development Corporation.
That close enough? All right, good. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Will Beckford, Managing Director at the Baltimore Development Corporation, and basically I want to just emphasize that BDC is committed to the principles of equitable economic development, and we believe that it's essential to the long-term growth of Baltimore City. We're currently in the process of hiring a small minority business equity manager. We actually had one up until a couple months ago. She took another job, so we're actually interviewing for someone to replace her. So we're already in that process of, or already have been in that process of looking to increase equity involvement in economic development here in the city of Baltimore. And we basically just want to make sure we specifically address issues surrounding equitable development and all of the work that we do. Some of the resources that we have, we always want to make sure that we're looking at areas of the city and trying to map and see what we're doing. As far as our facade improvement grant program, which I think a lot of folks know about, we've done hundreds of facade improvement grants. So we kind of map between 2015 and 2017 to see where we were doing these facade improvements. And what we noticed was there were a couple blind spots. While we're doing most of them outside of downtown and in those areas, there were a couple blind spots that we noticed that why aren't we getting facade improvement grants in this area, in some of the areas of real disinvestment. So we looked at that and we said, how can we fix that from an equitable standpoint? We looked at, talked to some of the merchants in those areas, in those commercial districts, and realized that they weren't able to come up with the match. Our program is a matching grant program. They weren't able to come up with the match. So we in turn said, how do we fix this? We went about doing a cluster FIG program, which we're engaged with right now in 3 different commercial districts, one on Liberty Heights Ave, one on Monument Street, and the other on the unit block of Howard Street, where there is no match. We're doing whole blocks of facade improvement grants. So it's just one way in which we look at, how can we be more equitable in an area where there's disinvestment in commercial districts, and we need to be a driver in that sense. That's just one example. Our microloan program is another program in which we looked at as well. We mapped it and we said, again, where are we missing loans in these areas and why are we missing these loans? So as far as when we move forward to hiring someone, again, that person is charged with looking at an equity assessment program for BDC from our from our resources, what we have, how are they being given out, what are we doing with those resources, but also are there other resources that we can come up with that match the needs of areas of disinvestment, areas that need those, that can't afford to do some of the things that our resources call for currently, but can we kind of correct those and fix some of that inequity from that standpoint. So that's just a little taste of kind of the things that we're doing. I'm not going to go into, you did a very good job of explaining all of the things. We work with planning. We have a food economic development officer that deals in food equity, making sure that, or trying to make sure that there is food accessibility in all areas of the city. We hired that person a couple years ago. And if people remember Stop Shop and Save stores, that there were 6 of them that closed down throughout the city a few years back. We replaced 5 of those 6 stores with grocery stores, so people who lived in those areas are not going without grocery where they would have been in a food desert per se. So those are the types of things that we do from an equity standpoint in our disinvested areas, and just making sure that we're paying attention at all times. And we can always learn more. and we're willing to do that. But we also think from a standpoint of, we need to have a baseline of from a citywide standpoint to understand, how do you judge success in your program, and that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Mr. Beckford. BMZA?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and members of the committee. Thank you for having us here to speak with you today. BMZA is fully in support of what we think are the goals and the aims of this bill and this program. Speaking from an agency that is very small, with a small budget, we have a full-time staff of four persons. I would just highlight the fact that a program like this, our concerns really revolve around the details and the implementation of the program. Like I said, we have 4 people in the office, so we would have to spread whatever work would need to be done across those 4 individuals. You'll likely hear this from many city agencies that are small. And I think that's going to be something that you'll hear quite a bit today and as this program moves forward. BMZA as an appeals agency, which is probably very similar to an agency like the Environmental Control Board, we hear appeals. So we don't dole out cash. We're not a grant-making agency. So whatever program was developed, I would encourage this council to narrowly tailor that program to the agency itself. I think a one-size-fits-all approach would not benefit the public and would not benefit this clearly very beneficial program. One way in which the equity lens can be put through the zoning appeals process, I think, is community outreach. We have a Zoning 101 presentation that we give to community groups, but we don't actively go out and say we have this. We wait for community groups to come to us and say, can you come to our meeting next Tuesday and give that presentation. So that's just one example of something that we could view through the equity lens to go out into the community and to educate folks about how the appeals process works, what doesn't work, and proactively do that to parts of the city that typically are not very well represented during our hearings. If there are any questions?
Thank you. Phew. Thank you. We're going to hold off on questions until the end. Thank you, Mr. Baumgartner.
Thank you.
Employees and elected officials retirement system. Employees and elected officials retirement systems. So A and B are number 8.
Good evening, the chairman and members of the council.
Can you speak up and get a little closer to the mic? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Adet Tutalabi. I'm from Employees and Elected Officials Retirement System, and we're fully in support of the bill, giving consideration to the amendments recommended by the Legal and Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Parking Authority?
Good evening. My name is Pete Little, Executive Director with the Parking Authority of Baltimore City. The Parking Authority supports passage of this bill with amendments recommended by Planning and Law. As noted during our budget hearing, we've tried over the years to, or we think we've tried anyway, to view our programs and initiatives with an equity lens, but we recognize that it'll be good to have a framework and some guidance in terms of how to do it correctly in the future. We have many of the same questions and concerns that other agencies have regarding training, coordination, and cost, if any, associated with the program. But we understand the intent and the goal of the program, and we fully support it. And we'll work along with council to make sure that it's enacted. Thanks.
Thank you. Environmental Control Board? Folks, please say your name at the beginning. Most of us know who you are, but some folks that are watching at home may not know.
Good evening, Rebecca Woods. I'm the Executive Director of the Environmental Control Board, and I would echo the comments made by BMZA as the function of the agency is to offer hearings for citations issued by other city agencies. Our function is one that doesn't always look the same way as other programs do through the equity lens, but certainly would also echo the commitment to the purpose and the intent. I think through Be More Beautiful, we will continue to look through the lens of equity to make sure that we're engaging in communities that are not always engaged.
Thank you. Fire and Police Employees Retirement System. Fire and Police Employees Retirement System. Is anyone present from that agency? Mayor's Office of Human Services.
Evening, Mr. Chair, Mr. President, members of the committee. My name is Terry Hickey. I'm the Director of the Mayor's Office of Human Services. So I want to start out by saying that our agency is in strong support of both the spirit and the letter behind this bill. And I think that, take a step back and say, I think we play a particular special role in this kind of work. What my staff knows is that we recognize poverty and homelessness have deep roots in racial inequity. We see it every day. And we see systemically how these things have been built. And so also in a role as a funder, we're basically a pass-through agency. We have at least 256 different organizations that we fund with various levels of funding that do this work in the community. So we have a double role. We have a role to look inward at what we're doing and how we're doing it, and we have a role to build into system design and function what other folks out there are doing, both growing the bench of organizations that can do this work and bring their own lens, and also working with groups that have been doing this for a number of years. And I want to echo what a lot of my colleagues have said and will say, but I want to just highlight a few quick areas just to give folks some thoughts on where we're looking at this more deeply. We've developed a coordinated access system. All funded housing programs in Baltimore City, funded by the city, now have to go through coordinated access. It gives us a chance to look across the board at how these resources are being given out, fair housing requirements which span race, gender identity, ethnic origin, disability, family status, sexual orientation, and more, and track exactly where those resources go. We'll be releasing on June 21st. We're inviting the whole council to come to the Journey to Jobs report release up at University of Baltimore, where we're looking at the interactions of the homeless service system, criminal justice, and jobs. The report recommends an adoption of an explicit racial equity lens in how we do workforce development with people experiencing extreme poverty. We'll also be hiring a workforce systems coordinator to focus on broader equity issues. Data analysis. Utilizing our homeless service management tool, we are able to disaggregate and analyze data in ways that are critical to identifying and addressing racial and other key disparities. And then another quick piece, but very important, for the end of this month, Mose will be releasing, for the first time ever, final standards and implementation plan for homeless services programs related to LGBTQ standards of care. Standards of care will create new policies for homeless service programs, including strategies to ensure equitable treatment and access to services for people identifying as LGBTQ. So we are in support. We look forward to being a part of this process in whatever role we can play. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hickey. Office of the Comptroller.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the council. I'm Stuart Beckham with the Office of the Comptroller. We are in support of this bill as set forth in the legislation with the amendments provided by the Planning Commission and the Law Department. There's not too much more we can add from the comments that have been made here. We are specifically concerned, however, and with emphasis of the resources and the costs that would be incurred by the agencies and the budget provisions that would be established by the finance and the mayor as to who would be responsible for implementing this. But again, we are in support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mayor's Office of Employment Development.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Jason Perkins Cohen. I'm the director of the Mayor's Office of Employment Development. I want to recognize Angel St. Jean, who is assistant director at MOED and is leading a lot of our systems work that includes race equity and inclusion frame.
Angel, can you have Angel stand just so we know that? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank the sponsor of this bill. As the Director of Employment, we know as much as anyone that when you look at the data on Baltimore, the data on Maryland, and the data on our country, the disparities in race in terms of employment and income are striking and alarming. And so we welcome the bill, we support the bill, and it's something we absolutely need to be focused on in employment. I also want to acknowledge that we believe that race equity and inclusion is critical to improve the employment outcomes for Baltimore City residents, and that our history of structural and institutional racism is very much why we're in the situation we are today, and something that our agency is working to combat on a daily basis, but it is an uphill climb. I want to point out 3 areas of focus for us on the issue of REI, race equity inclusion, and I also want to thank Associated Black Charities, Adaria Ayala. We're fortunate to have them in our city, and they certainly have a focus of employment. We work with them and learn from them. Our 3 focuses in terms of specifics would be on who we serve using a race equity inclusion lens, what resources we are providing, how we're spending our resources using the same lens, and the strategies that we're developing. But once again, we're supportive of the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Labor Commissioner?
Good evening. I'm Deborah Moore Carter, Labor Commissioner for the City of Baltimore, another small agency of 6 people, but obviously we're in support of the bill. One of the things that we're looking at in the Office of the Labor Commissioner is how the language in some of the memoranda of understanding affect equity, and I'll give you one example. In one of our MOUs, there's language that the department has to promote the first person on the list. So in looking at that, that may be a barrier, and we're looking at the MOU for other barriers, and we'll have to negotiate that kind of language out of the contract. So we're in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Recreation and Parks?
Good evening, honorable members, City Council, and President. Recreation and Park is definitely, we look forward to supporting such a bill, a long time coming. And anything that we can do to help expedite, support, create something of this magnitude is highly welcome. We're really excited that this is happening in Baltimore City. And we do plan on looking at all of our hiring practices. We plan on looking at our activities, all of our programs in every community to bring about equity in everything that we do for all the citizens of Baltimore. So we definitely look forward, and we actually are excited that this is coming to fruition. And again, we're in full support, Baltimore City Recreation and Parks.
Thank you. Mr. Sutton, Health? Oh, I'm saying thank you and your name, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. DePaul Dibber on behalf of the Baltimore City Health Department. We at the Baltimore City Health Department are fully in support of this bill, and we'd like to thank Councilman Scott for introducing it. The Baltimore City Health Department views public health as the elimination of disparities. It's a stated mission of our department to bring our most vulnerable communities up to the standards of our most healthiest. And so with that in mind, we look at everything through an equity lens. So we highlighted in our agency report a couple of different programs that we use to eliminate disparities amongst a number of different groups in the city, but I'd like to highlight 2 that I didn't mention in that report. In the field of HIV/AIDS, we noticed that one group had significantly higher infection rates than the entirety of the city. And that group happened to be young, gay, black, and male. And so what we did was target that community. We focused our advocacy, our testing, our treatment to events that touch upon that specific demographic, and we've seen success. And in the field of maternal and child health, we've noticed a significant decline in infant mortality rates because we have targeted communities based on a vulnerability index. And again, we noticed that the communities that needed the most help were low income and they were minorities. And by doing so, we were able to take that mortality rate from 138 in 2009 to 79 in 2016. That's a 38% decline. So when we talk about equity, it's something that we are passionate about in Baltimore City Health Department. And with that in mind, we fully support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Department of Human Resources.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and members of the council. My name is Jason Ingram, Chief Policy Advisor with the Department of Human Resources. I would like to start off by saying DHR supports the bill. We have reviewed and considered the we've reviewed and considered the proposed legislation. We understand and recognize the role that historic policy and planning decisions have played in creating and exacerbating, in some cases, inequity and inequality in Baltimore City. Moreover, we appreciate the council's attempt to address these systemic inequalities through its legislative powers. Still, we feel that the legislation needs further examination with respect specifically to the scope, the oversight, and enforcement authority of any designated office or offices, agency or agencies in addressing any and all city policies, programs, or practices that will potentially have a negative or disparate outcome relative to individuals in the city of Baltimore based on their race, gender, and income. Currently, right now, DHR does have a policy and compliance division, of which I'm the leader. We also have an EEO officer within the policy and compliance division. We're responsible for making sure that we don't run afoul of any anti-discriminatory laws, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. And so we're constantly looking at those things, and you should also know, Council, that recently we've reached out to all of the city agencies as we move towards centralization, and we've begun to talk about compliance across our different agencies. So we will be doing a series of compliance audits to make sure that we are comporting ourselves or comporting our policies and practices to what the law requires.
Thank you. Department of General Services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ryan Trout with the Department of General Services, and the department, thank you. The department supports this legislation and echoes some of the concerns mentioned by the other agencies here today. First, I also want to thank you for the opportunity to weigh in on this important and vital piece of legislation. As an internal-facing agency, the department is committed to working closely with other partner agencies to ensure broad-based equity. We try to do this in a number of ways. Our Facilities Maintenance Division has recently began a mobile maintenance program, which ensures that there's geographic equity to the preventative maintenance and maintenance of city-owned buildings, so that all of the maintenance isn't just happening at our downtown campus, but it's also happening in our multipurpose centers around the city. Similarly, our major projects and fleet divisions work closely with other agencies to meet their stated needs. For example, just yesterday, our fleet division hosted the first fleet summit with 15 to 20 city agencies coming out to our Biddle Street location to learn about the fleet, how we manage that, and then so we can work closely with them to make sure that we meet their needs. Again, we support this legislation.
Thanks. I just wanted to point out, we only have one council member here today whose district borders the county. I think that's Councilman Scott, if I'm not mistaken. But that was very thoughtful of you guys, and I'm sure that our colleagues that aren't here tonight that do border or are further from downtown certainly appreciate that thoughtful approach. Baltimore Police Department.
Good evening. My name is Michelle Wurzberger. I am the chief of the Consent Decree Implementation Unit for the Baltimore Police Department. The agency is in support of this bill, and honestly, we are fully engaged in this work right now. Under the consent decree, we are required to update the bulk of our policies to make sure that they conform with this thinking, make sure that we are not engaging in disparate actions against folks. And so it starts with the policy updates, and that process is very intentional. It requires us to not only, we take a first draft, we send it out to the community, we negotiate with the Department of Justice and the monitoring team to make sure that what we have developed is in compliance with the consent decree, and after that we send it back out to the community, because it's important that the community is able to speak to how this policy could impact and how it has impacted them in the past. And then from there, we are required to update all of our trainings, so that, of course, if you have a new policy, you have to provide adequate and professional training, so then you can hold folks accountable. The really big piece of this is technology, and making sure, and the consent decree is very clear, that we have got to update our technology, bring us into the 21st century, so that we can run good, accurate, and reliable analytics as to what we're doing, where we're doing it, when we're doing, how, and with whom. And that really goes to providing a picture of whether or not we are impacting people disparately and inequitably. And so that is the sum and substance of our position.
Thank you. And we just want to say for the record that we appreciate the police department being here when you don't have to. All the other agencies have to be here because they have to do what we say. You don't. So we appreciate that greatly.
CHAP, Commission for Historical and Architectural Preservation.
Me again, Stephanie Smith. Planning. The Commission on Historical and Architectural Preservation is a commission supported by the Department of Planning. I just wanted to quickly highlight that one of the things that they've really been focused on is making sure that residents know that they live in a historic district or not, because that can be taken for granted that there are some districts that are more known across the city, and we want to see how we can combine with our engagement efforts, raise awareness around the existing historic districts, so that communities can see how can that existing designation be a part of your planning as a community group or association to strengthen some of the things you already want to do. We also want to work with communities to get a better sense of what is the history that is being unacknowledged that could lead to some new designations in the city. One of the most recent historic building designations, the Chick Webb Memorial Recreation Center, was a perfect example of community members really raising the appropriate awareness around history that needed to be revisited, and that's something that CHAP is dedicated to continuing to do so, and combined with planning staff, making sure that we're raising awareness around historical relevance because, quite frankly, in the field, it's often been stewardship of white memory, and we realize that we have to have an expansion of what is, in fact, historical and important about Baltimore.
Thank you. Fire?
Good evening. Amy Beth Lazier, Baltimore City Fire Department. The fire department is in support of this bill with the highly laudable goal of eliminating structural and institutional racism and discrimination and closing the gaps in policy, practice, and allocation of city resources for equitable treatment. The department has currently implemented a number of programs with the goal of enhancing equity and extending opportunities for all. A fundamental area in which the department would continue to expand its equity efforts under the rubric of an equity assessment program is within its recruitment and hiring efforts. For instance, the department has developed an internal multicultural recruitment committee, which consists of employees of different races, genders, sexual orientations, and backgrounds, which in part has made and implemented some methods to increase diversity within the department through recruitment. One of the tactics they developed was to set up various pop-up recruitment centers in different locations throughout the city, in part focusing on African American neighborhoods and neighborhoods facing economic challenges. The department also uses its local neighborhood stations for recruitment and deploys internet-capable laptops to stations, enabling any citizen the opportunity to apply for or to sign an interest list for fire department entry-level jobs. The department also is considering solutions for helping potential applicants overcome the hurdle of having a driver's license, which currently is a mandatory job requirement, as we've become aware that this may be a barrier for certain populations. The department also has implemented a process by which we include members of the community on our hiring, interviewing committees. To date, over 450 city residents throughout the city have volunteered and taken part in these interviews, and we select candidates based on their recommendations. Currently, the department is in the process of designing a girls' fire camp with the goal of encouraging young females to consider fire service as a career. We're also considering the implementation of a program in which female applicants can come to the academy to receive free instruction on strength building and teaching techniques that, for women to be able to use their unique physical abilities to complete the same tasks. Additionally, through a partnership with the Baltimore City Public School System, we've implemented our high school fire rescue program with the overarching goal to provide an opportunity to city high school students of all backgrounds with training and access to fire rescue service in an attempt to increase diversity and inclusion by reaching potential applicants at a much younger age. Finally, the department is looking into creating a mandatory anti-discrimination, harassment, and bullying training program with the intention to eliminate inequitable treatment based on any protected category, as well as to advise employees of the avenues available to report any such perceived conduct. Under the equity assessment program, we would continue to develop unique recruitment and candidate selection techniques and policies such as the ones that I just mentioned to attract broader diversity. In summary, the department is in support of the equity assessment program. We would recommend that the bill be amended to provide that rules or regulations shall be implemented that will include guidance on the methodology and requirements of the equity assessment that's mandated under the bill. We would also recommend that language be included in the bill to provide for training by experts in the field for all equity officers as coordinated by an appropriate city agency. Finally, we would recommend that a definition of the term equity be included in the bill. In summary, we are in support of City Council Bill 1802-3 and welcome the opportunity to participate in the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Baltimore City IT.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Lindsay Wines. I'm the Chief of Staff of Baltimore City Office of Information and Technology. BCIT is in support of this bill with amendments issued by the Planning and Law Departments. As we move forward with transforming information technology in Baltimore, we will be doing so with an equity lens in mind. Our strategic plan actually calls for creation of a diversity and inclusion program for IT, and we're in the midst of creating a broadband strategy looking at all areas of the city for fiber expansion. The mission of Baltimore City Information Technology is to provide sustainable infrastructure and technology to support and enhance city departments, communities, businesses, and mayoral goals. BCIT will support departments in implementation of IT that supports equity across the city. Again, we're in support of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Department of Transportation.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Mohammed Khalid. I'm the Deputy Director, Chief Engineer for Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation supports the City Council Bill 18-0223. It provides flexibility to the department as we engage in a process to develop implementation policies that take into account equity on a future selection and prioritization process. The Department of Transportation, working with the Department of Planning and other agencies, embarking on the city's first comprehensive transportation plan, which will engage a complete analysis of the city's public space and right-of-way, identify needs of decaying infrastructure and technology, analyze current and future demands on limited right-of-way, address safety issues, identify opportunities for public space investments that will catalyze neighborhood improvements. The comprehensive transportation plan will take a comprehensive look at financial constraints and help prioritize investment of limited resources, as well as identify a path forward, growing the resource pool, and will also establish process of performance measurement. This plan will establish visions for transportation in the city and make recommendations for ensuring a comprehensive multimodal network that meets the need of today's and long term. This level of analysis will provide a global view of resource allocation and will provide information regarding investment needs. Once this data is available, it can be analyzed based on equity factors and provide more informed decision making with the Department of the Planning. The Department of Transportation also began analyzing individual programs regarding funding allocation and needs to find ways to work more closely with our partner agencies and outside entities to grow the resource pool to provide fully funded improvement program in economically disadvantaged areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Department of Public Works.
Good evening. My name is Marcia Collins. I'm here this evening representing the Department of Public Works. Thank you to the committee for inviting us here this evening. We have a rather opposite situation for the smaller agencies in that we are a very large one. And we also perform services that are for all the citizens of Baltimore. So I feel that we have a big job before us, but it is a worthy one. We feel that creating this equity analysis program provides a structure for us to systematically look at how we do our projects, how we determine our policies, how we implement, how we reach out to people. We have a lot on our plate, but I think one of the things I see as an opportunity under this program is just sitting here listening to the other agencies. There are many things that are currently happening that can help inform us on how we can tackle certain programs. For example, reaching out to communities is fine if the community is well organized. For communities that are not well organized, many of them are communities in distress, makes it very difficult to establish good communication with them and to also get good communication back. The other concern that we have had is that we have a lot of established organizations that the leadership is aging out. And we're hoping that there'll be opportunities for people to step forward and fill those positions so that we can establish good, solid relationships with our communities and have a better ear to what their concerns are. It's a challenge, but I think there's a lot of good things happening in other agencies that may help us to work on that particular issue. We have looked at our capital improvement program under what we call integrated planning framework. It is a process whereby we look at a number of criteria to help us prioritize. We have a lot to have to do. We don't have all the money in the world to do it right away, so we have to prioritize. And social aspects were one of the criteria that we look at, and I think this particular framework will lend itself well to expanding that social impact area so that we can routinely look at and consider, is this a community that really needs to be supported? Is there something else happening here? Maybe transportation is doing something to lift up the community's condition of their streets, or, so there are opportunities here for cooperation to better reach out to some of these communities. We have also been very active in the VRI program. And one of the things I like about the VRI program is that it is a collaborative effort of many agencies to tackle one problem. And there's a lot of ways we can tackle that problem, and we all have a part to play in it. I think there may be issues in addition to the distressing effects of crime that we might also want to look at from a collaborative multi-agency approach that may help us be more effective in what we are trying to do. It may not just be something we can do well, it might need the support of other agencies. I liked hearing what other agencies are doing as far as tracking their information. I don't think we're there yet as far as from an equity lens. We've got a ways to go there. But I like what I'm hearing in other agencies, and I think they can help us inform as well. We have done a number of things to reach out into communities to try to encourage our young people to come and work with us and work for us. We've looked at small business development as part of some of our other programs. And while this is very helpful, they're discrete individual programs. And what I see this bill addressing is to be more than just looking at, we're going to do this here, we're going to do that there. It's got to be pervasive throughout the agency. I think that's going to be a big challenge for us just because we're big. And training is going to be vital. We have a lot of people to train, and we have to begin to think this so that it becomes second nature to begin to factor these in and to ask these questions on a consistent basis when we're looking at our policies and procedures. Having said all that, we are pleased to be part of this process. We're here in support of the bill. I think there have been some amendments proposed that help us better understand the outcomes that are desired by the sponsor. And we're looking forward to continue to work on this bill and to be successful in the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Office of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the council. My name is Sharita Thomas. I'm the acting director with the Baltimore City Office of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement. The Office of Civil Rights and Wage Enforcement is an agency whose mission is rooted in equity in law enforcement, employment, disability access, and wage compliance. We are in strong support of this bill. The Wage Commission enforces prevailing and living wage laws on contracts awarded by the City of Baltimore. Currently, the Wage Commission is responsible for monitoring more than $1 billion in living and prevailing wage contracts. The majority of those constituents we serve are affected by inequitable incomes. These employees usually represent the Latinx and African American communities, returning citizens, and economically disadvantaged workers. In order for us to move forward with enforcing our compliance and being able to comply with the equity assessment program, we would need a wage compliant tracking system, which is currently in the works right now, but it would help us automate our process. Currently, the Wage Commission is 2 compliance officers responsible for the entire city of Baltimore. We are looking to experience some growth in the very near future. We are assessing our policies and our programming right now to see how we can further support this program.
Thank you. Department of Planning again, Commission on Sustainability.
Nice to see everyone again, Mr. Chairman. The Sustainability Commission wanted to also echo the CHOP Commission and Planning Commission in supporting our recommendations going forward. But specifically, they wanted to lift up the sustainability plan that's being updated right now was kind of the planning agency's kind of first foray into more intentionally thinking about engagement. And they worked with 125 ambassadors across the city. They were residents who reached out to their neighbors, friends, and their, people that they knew or didn't know. When they went up to people at bus stops, what have you, to find out what it was they liked about their community, what they thought were challenges that needed to be addressed, and that's why the sustainability update has expanded beyond a more environmentally focused document to something much more expansive, to beyond like I said, environment, to concerns around getting a living wage, how to get a job, how to build a sense of community. It was a very broad document that was informed by our 125 ambassadors, who importantly were given a level of compensation because their expertise as residents is just as valuable as oftentimes consultants that we use across city government. And we think there's a way that we can be sensitive in harnessing the knowledge base of our residents in a way that's respectful of their time and often limited resources to participate in partnership with us as an agency. So sustainability just wanted to lift up their commitment to equity at the commission level and also on the staff level. Thank you again.
Thank you. Housing and Community Development.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Sharon DuBois with the Department of Housing and Community Development, and we're thankful for this bill and very supportive of the spirit and intent, which really provides an enhanced awareness of the importance of really looking at all programs and policies through this equity lens. We welcome the opportunity to enhance our efforts in providing safe, healthy, and affordable housing for all residents. We have a variety of tools that we use to support neighborhoods and expand housing choices, and adding this equity lens will only strengthen our work and add to our toolbox. We look forward to learning more about the program and with the training, and enhancing our programs further to support the city's equity goals. We actually, several members of Housing went to a conference yesterday in DC called Deconstruct Our Past, Redesign Our Future. And it was really a great reminder of all the inequities that may be here today have taken years, and now we've got to start to bring that equity back. And we're, with our new management team, our new organization, it's just perfect timing for us to start looking at the way we're doing business. And it is really informative to hear what other agencies are doing and how we can all work together on this to make a more equitable city. So thank you, Councilman Scott, for sponsoring this bill.
Thank you. Bureau of Budget and Management Research.
Good evening, and thank you. My name is Bob Senemy, Budget Director, representing the Department of Finance tonight, and first wanted to echo the thought that we support the intent and the goals of this legislation. First wanted to highlight a couple things that our department has done, our Bureau has done around this issue. First and foremost, we actually had the good fortune of having a peer exchange with Seattle's office. They were interested in our budget process. We were interested in their racial equity office. And so we were able to send one of our staff members to Seattle to learn a little bit more about what they did. We learned that Seattle, they have what they call their toolkit, where they have a series of questions that they ask, that they train their staff to ask those questions when they're making policy decisions and when they're making budget decisions. So that was interesting for us. Coming back from that, we had a staff retreat with our folks, and we talked about incorporating this into our budget process. So, in our current budget process, we ask agencies to make proposals, budget proposals. We score those on a variety of criteria. The most important one being, are the proposals in alignment with the goals and the outcomes that the city's trying to achieve? But equity could certainly be one of the ways that we score budget proposals to make sure we're in keeping with that goal. I wanted to mention too that our office sponsors what we call the Good Government Book Club, and the most recent book that we read, it's open to any city employees, was something called a book called The Color of Law, which looks at ways that government policies have in some ways encouraged segregation in our neighborhood. So it's another way to raise awareness among employees about how important this issue is. So outside of the Department of Finance, what we're doing, we did also have to look at this, of course, from a cost standpoint for the city as a whole. And on that front, we do have some concerns about this bill. The bill requires that besides having a central director, the bill, of course, requires that each agency has an equity coordinator and that they conduct equity assessments. Our concern, which you heard from other agencies, is that could pull folks away from their core tasks. I think a good model, what we would suggest, a good model is having one central coordinator and making sure that the training is really good so that this just gets baked into the culture, into the way that we make decisions and the way we view policy decisions. Without that central coordination and a really strong training program, we do have concerns that folks that are working on this could get pulled away from their core tasks. We looked at programs that have been done elsewhere. Seattle and Portland are two that have really beefed up programs. They cost about $2 million a year. We also found a model of a program in San Antonio where they had just one central coordinator, and they really focused on the training, making sure that staff in each of the agencies bakes this into the culture of the way they look at decisions, and that we think is a lower cost alternative to where we still achieve the goals and the intent of this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. With the exception of Department of Law, is there any other agencies in the room who have not testified? Any other agencies? Okay. We are going to, Hillary, if you could do a brief overview from law, but without getting into the proposed amendments. I don't know if that's possible, because okay. I feel like most of your content probably deals with the amendments, but.
Right, Hillary Ruley, Department of Law. So basically, the concept of the program is legally fine. The only issue is vesting citywide oversight in the planning department, just simply because the charter doesn't give planning the authority to sort of control the actions or deal with the other agencies that way. So we did a bunch of amendments just to try to fix that. They echoed a little bit of what planning did, and I think then everybody pulled them together and tried to come up with one set that accomplished that. So
thank you.
Okay.
Yep. Colleagues, everyone has the proposed amendments on their yep. Just want to make sure everyone has those amendments. I'm going to go to Councilman Pinkett, and we're going to do questions for the agency officials. Then we're going to take testimony from the public, and then we will start to work through the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Mr. Centerme, because you mentioned reaching out to, I think you said Seattle and Portland, as it relates to getting information about their toolkit and what they do. Were you aware that there's a locally developed toolkit that's nationally recognized?
No. What are you referring to?
Associated Black Charities.
I have not seen that one in particular. We've seen Seattle. Seattle shared theirs with I haven't seen that one.
Okay. Just curious. I mean, because there is one that's locally that's recognized that that we should take a look at as well. That I think that could benefit us moving forward. My next question was to the planning department. Ms. Smith. And I guess my initial question, are you familiar with Associated Black Charities?
Yes, sir.
Was that, is their toolkit something that we've taken a look at or assessed?
Yes, our food equity program has actually taken the closest look at the specific toolkit, but we've also shared it among our equity committee staff. When I came on board about a year ago, almost in July, they were already using the USDN lens, but it wasn't exclusive. It was just something that we had a lot of access to for free because we were already a member of USDN. So to be frank, we're kind of trying to find the perfect mix of lenses that will work. So, I think our research is not yet done, and we have been in close contact with the DAR about how we can strengthen our own action plan, because it's really just a foundational first step. It's not, you know, it's not done. It's a living document.
Okay, good. So my last and next question was, being that planning department is, from my perspective, is so far out in front as relates to agencies really being on the forefront, at least as far as our city, as relates to equity. What has been the impact on the planning department as a staff and policy, as far as, you know, turning the equity lens onto, you know, planning's day-to-day operations and how we hire? Has it been impactful? Has it been successful? What have been the results?
I think one of the things that I've shared even with some of the other agencies in the room is that I came on board thinking that it would be a lot about amending existing policies, but a lot of it is about the absence of policy. People are organically doing their job, you know, based on kind of informal patterns, right? And that's really where kind of the sweet spot of blind spots really grow, right? So I think really a lot of the work now is slowing down and trying to figure out what are we missing by kind of just doing things because we know how to do them, but are we missing things because we don't have like a measured step, particularly around engagement, right? So, because if you're a connected person, you don't need policies. You pick up the phone, you get certain people on the phone, you know, you send a set of emails. For people who do not have relationships, policies and procedures are their salvation because it gives an express way for them to interact and engage with decision makers and stakeholders. So we're still trying to refine what that looks like on the engagement level, even when it looks like on the communications level. Something that seems very small, but I think has been a part of our online communications strengthening is that our newsletter was being disseminated via a PDF, and disproportionately people of color are going to access the internet via a mobile platform. So just changing your platforms to mobile friendly platforms for your work, it was a way to make sure people could consume our information in a way that fit their lifestyle and their access base. I know that's just a small example, but it's like it gets really granular because you've been doing what you've always been doing, but if you slow down and think about who are we missing from doing things the way we've always been doing it, it's opened up to me a lot of opportunities for thoughtful input, and it's also been empowering for people who are not senior leaders in the agency because some of the best ideas are coming from junior staff, not only because of their age, which might give them a different perspective, you know, on technology and different things that could enhance our work, but I think it's like we can't practice equity externally if we're not practicing it internally, if that makes sense, Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Scott.
Thank you. And for my question for Mr. Senator, but first for my colleague, Councilman, when we get to the amendments, you'll see a portion where we think that we're going to be able to add in, and I've talked to Adar at AVC about how we can add in them and other partners to bring and help bring the agencies up to speed throughout the first year of the program. But for Mr. Senator, when you looked at the other cities, and as you know, as someone who talks to other cities quite frequently, did you guys notice that other cities also had like legislation across the country? There's plenty of cities who have the toolkit, but some of them, in Seattle being one of the earliest, and talking to some of my colleagues in councils that are there in other cities like Seattle, they now regret not having it in law and in legislation because it's not something that actually has to happen.
So we didn't look at that specifically, but I'm aware that that's an issue. They spearheaded it. They kind of decided to do it on their own. There was no legislation backing it. So we were looking at it from more of a cost perspective. What's the size? What are they getting out of it? How beefed up is it? Is there training available? We didn't look at that component of it specifically, to be honest.
Oh, sorry, Councilman. We've been joined by Councilman Chris Burnett from the 8th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Colleagues, any other questions for city agencies?
I have another question,
Please.
And this is for Ms. Smith again, because there's talk about, well, obviously the bill calls for identifying a coordinator, and I just wanted to identify the equity coordinator. And so I just wanted to hear from your perspective, you know, what type of skill set, professional experience, possibly academic background, because I'm wondering if there would just be a natural tendency to identify someone who's already on staff to fulfill this role, but is this field of work such that you can just plug somebody who's already on your staff and get this done. So I just want to hear, what does it entail?
Well, our Planning Commission recommendations were very strong about making sure that someone who was qualified and trained was in this role, and that the need for training for the staff would need to be ongoing. It couldn't be, no offense to Starbucks, an afternoon. It would need to be something a bit more substantive. So, you know, it's an emerging field, but there are still practitioners that have qualifications that you can you know, reflect upon, that show their expertise around equity, around inclusion, around racial justice. And as you mentioned with Associated Black Charities and some of our local academics, they are you know, well equipped to provide those resources. And something else that was shared through public comment at Planning Commission, and we may hear it echoed here, is that we could also learn a lot from our federal agencies that have been really at the forefront of applying civil rights law to their hiring and promotion practices. And so some of this thought knowledge exists. It's about us corralling it locally. And I think if there are willing people within agencies that do have some level of expertise they would like to enhance, that is possible. But I do not think the existing body should be expected to all of a sudden be fully equipped.
Okay.
And I'm still learning myself.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions for city agencies? Okay, at this time we'll go to public testimony. We have Adar Ayera. I hope I said that right?
You said that perfectly.
Thank you. And if you're with I know you're with ABC, if you're with an organization, if you could please say which organization you're with.
Good evening and thank you. My name is Adar Ayera and I am with Associated Black Charities. ABC is a public foundation. We are determined to change the future economically, because what we understand and why I am here today, what we understand is that we have talent that is going unused in this city. What we understand is that we have people who, by virtue of law, policy, and our institutional structures, are being truncated in their ability to live up to their gifts and also to share those with the city of Baltimore. To us, this is an economic conversation. We understand that when people cannot live up to who they are meant to be because their opportunities and access are truncated, we, the city of Baltimore, the residents in Baltimore, the businesses in Baltimore, we are losing out, regardless of race. Our businesses are losing because discretionary income that our citizens would otherwise have to spend is not there. We, the residents of Baltimore, are losing in terms of a return on investment because our money is going into back-end strategies to try to contain the logical outcomes of inequity, crime, instead of investing in the front end where we get a return on investment. We are here in support of this proposed legislation because it provides an opportunity for each agency to take time to look, to assess, and to change the way the business is done. I'm going to keep this short, but I do want to offer some definitions. First of all, a definition of equity. It's not a definition that we have to make up. There are definitions that are already there. Equity is the condition and the process together that would be achieved if the identities assigned to historically oppressed groups no longer acted as the most powerful predictor of how one fares. So we don't do equity. Equity is an outcome. We talk about representation and inclusion and changing the way the business is done with an outcome of creating more equitable environments. And from the perspective of Associated Black Charities, creating more equitable environments in which more people are set up for success. so that our city, our businesses, our communities, our families can succeed. So someone earlier said that they wanted a definition of equity to be included. This is a standard definition that most people who are versed on this issue are using. Along with my testimony, which you can read at your leisure, I passed out our 10 essential questions, the policy applications of a racial equity lens, 10 essential questions for policy development, review, and evaluation. This is a document that we developed in 2015 because we know that legislation, that policy is not race neutral. And class, gender, sexual identity, gender identity, all of that operates within the context of race. Let's be clear. So even though our analysis is intersectional, we understand a root causality and understand that this legislation has the potential of allowing all of us space to address that. So it's not just about what programs we develop. It's not just about what institutional policies we have. We know that if all it took to erase inequities, and especially racialized inequities, were those things, we would be golden. The fact is that it really takes more than that. It does take a very specific lens and framework. So I want to share just another definition with you about what a racial equity framework or an equity framework is. It is an approach to the world, an approach to seeing the world that involves many components, including analyzing data, which we've talked about, and the type of data that we collect around race, around ethnicity, around all of the other intersectional issues. It includes an understanding of disparities and also learning why those disparities exist. It includes looking at problems and their root causes from a structural perspective, which means that we have to look at the accumulation of history and historical outcomes on those issues and problems and challenges that we are seeing today. And it involves thinking about and putting into operation strategies that include elimination of policies, of practices, of attitudes, and of cultural messages that continue to keep us doing business as usual in those ways that continue to keep us getting what we've got. No program, no policy in the world is going to get us differently if we do not look at, examine, and think about changing the attitudes and the cultural perspectives that got us here. That is an equity lens. So this piece of legislation can help open the door to our getting there. We do not have to reinvent the wheel. There are people who've been doing this in this city for 20, 30 years who stand ready to assist you, Councilman Scott, you council members, you agency heads, in whatever way is needed. And that is our pledge to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Patricia Truex. Thank you, ma'am. Helena Hicks.
Good evening, Chairman. Good evening, members of the City Council, and to my friends and colleagues in the audience. I am Dr. Helena Hicks, longtime civil rights activist, fifth-generation Baltimorean, many of whom were civil rights activists. I am former professor of social history. I know Baltimore City front and back. I work for health, human resources, housing, where else have I worked? Welfare, I've done the whole 9 yards, city and state. So it's hard to fool me. So when you talk about equity, you can have all the nice definitions, all the nice proposals you want. We don't have equity in the city. And I don't remember in all of my 80-some years of us having it, because you don't start at the right place. You want to always explain what you've done and what that has accomplished, which winds up being pretty close to zero. You have no equity because you never include everybody in. I could tell you right now a plan I'm a part of to take one of your biggest solid institutions in the city of Baltimore to federal court, because you can't get equity in state and city courts. City and state are too close, and you will hear about it very soon. And it's an equity issue. But this bill, which talks about putting equity in planning, not even a required department, certainly does not have any clout when it comes to enforcement. It's just a farce. You cannot do that. Equity, if you're going to have some agency in charge of equity, it's got to, first of all, be something that's based in law, and second, it's got to have some clout. Because people do not give up what they have been comfortably used to. So equity is not going to be an easy battle. I've gone the equity route. I've been a civil rights battler, and you all know it. It's not easy. And I get to do over some of the things I did at 20. I'm getting to do over again. So if you're talking about equity, first of all, you need a required position. You need somebody who's not going to change every 4 years when you elect another mayor. And so you get a new person. You need somebody who's going to be civil service and going to be there over the long haul and is going to have some definite responsibilities. No, you don't want to hear that. It means money. It means change. You know, it's like Frederick Douglass said. He said, people want crops without plowing up the field. And I'm saying to you, that's what you're asking for. You want equity without doing all the work it takes to get equity. But you need a person. That person has to have some staff. You want to build a better city, you've got to have better government. It's not the greatest. I've been a part of it. I've been at the executive level in this city. I've been at the executive level at the state. I have been a consultant for the federal government in all sorts of places. South America, Italy, France, England. I've been the rounds. I know we can do better. I see better in places that we say we are better than, and we're not. If you want to really have equity, start with getting a permanent employee and some staff that's going to be there after this mayor leaves, and the next mayor leaves, and the next mayor leaves. Because I'm talking about having been a part of this city government. I came in at age 20, Department of Social Services. It wasn't equity then. It's now this much later, 2018, and you still don't have it. Wake up. What's the only thing left to do? You've got to make it a permanent part of the government, or you're not going to have it. You're just going to have these hearings and these bills, and you'll feel better because you're paid to feel better anyway. They pay you to come here and testify. Nobody pays me for what I do. I do what I do because I have a real feeling for the city and real respect for what citizens give up and what citizens want for their environment. I'm saying, you come along with me, because I'm not going on your ride.
Linda Batts.
Good evening, everyone. I am delighted to attend this critical hearing and to share my brief perspectives as a successfully retired civil rights executive with 31 years of experience. You're talking about equity, and what you're really talking about in its least common denominator is changing the culture of agencies as well as changing the culture of the city of Baltimore. That's an enormous task. We've already heard some of the discussion today center around the thinking about the additional workload and how that might impact core tasks and the mission. Equity is not separate from the core task and the mission. It's embedded and should be an institutional part of the way we think, talk,
Ms.
appropriate
Batts,
money,
pull the
and make
mic up.
decisions.
Pull the mic up so they can hear you at home.
The way we think, talk, appropriate money, make decisions, reward and or discipline. And in that regard, while I appreciate much of the preliminary legwork that planning has done starting in 2015, I have to recognize, after having read the draft sustainability plan, that perhaps some of why we are here today in terms of segregation and redlining stems inherently from some of the thinking and the opportunities that could have been changed within the Office of Planning. So in that regard, I do not believe that the Office of Planning should be the one to shepherd this. It must come through an independent vehicle. Planning should be on a level playing field with every other agency and should not be given a hand up to orchestrate something that they have not yet finely tuned. So that's my first comment. The second comment is that in rolling this out, it must be institutional, it must be coherent. Each agency must align this equity with their core business, and it must be transferred in terms of the training that those agencies impart, how they hire, how they reward, and how they make decisions on a general day-to-day basis. And so in that regard, we support the bill, I support the bill, but you gotta put it with an independent broker. As for the fund, the money proposed is like pea gravel in the Atlantic Ocean. You will find that it's going to be woefully insufficient to address the past legacy that is currently affecting the city and many of the citizens today. One of the things that I think might be extremely beneficial is for the city to do a retrospective review, an autopsy, if you will, to find out over the past 4 or 5 years, how much money has been paid out in terms of settling EEO complaints, civil rights complaints, and other issues that have a relationship to equity, where those offices, what agencies those claims were made with respect to, and determining whether or not subsequent to those outlays of expenditures, there were any lessons learned that resulted in them adopting new best practices and what have you. So I say in conclusion, there's a lot of work to do. I support it. This is necessary. It has to be placed in the right place to be successful, with a leader who can imbue the respect that this particular responsibility necessitates. And all managers, supervisors, and leaders in the city have to be held accountable through their performance plans, rewards, and other perquisites for meeting this requirement. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lou Fields.
Boy, some hard acts to follow those last two speakers. But anyway, my name is Louis Fields, and I am the president of the Baltimore African American Tourism Council, which is a nonprofit organization in Baltimore City. Some 20-some years, and one of the things I like to, not knocking ABC, because I love ABC, but I think often when I come to City Hall, it's as if ABC is the only African American institution you folks recognize. There's many think tanks who are really professionals in this particular line of thought, racial injustice in Baltimore City. I mean, this is like dozens of them. So you can take your pick. But what I wanted to say today is that this bill, which, Mr. Chairman, is very timely and very appropriate, particularly now that we are going through the Baltimore City budget right now. Because if you take a close look at this year's FY19 budget, Mr. Chairman, you will find there's inequities all over the place in this year's budget that you folks are reviewing right now. And I, not knocking any agency, I just review budgets, I read it. And I read the planning budget yearly because they often have these grants for arts and culture. And in this, I don't know if you guys have it, but this year's budget, I have a sheet here that talks about their capital budget distribution by agency detail, which again is in the Department of Planning. And they have some $3.5 million just in this little part I'm looking at. And under the $3.5 million, $2.6 million goes to planning, which leaves about $1 million, which is divided among 10 organizations in a city of 67% black people. Out of the 10 organizations and $925,000 left over, only one African-American institution receives any money out of that $925,000. They receive $100,000. So you started off with a pot of $3.5 million, but by the time it gets implemented, the one lone African-American group who receives any, if you would say, equity in that is the Great Blacks and Whites receiving $100,000. And then when you look even further at the budget, you'll find money's all over the place, and we as citizens, we want to know where's this money going. $147 million for economic development jobs. Well, you give us that big number, but we never see a breakdown, where the dollars went, what kind of money was spent in certain communities. Agency by agency came up today and talked about what they're planning on doing. I wish they had did this years ago, as many people said. One of the issues we look at is trash collection. Some parts of the city's clean. Other parts of the city look like we don't get trash pickup. Another thing is we look at funding. When you look at funding for marketing and promotion of the city, you have one entity who receives the lion's share because it's mandated, but it's not mandated that they can't share some of those dollars with people in the city itself. We have lots of inequity in this city, and it continues almost across almost every city agency. When I look at the Department of Transportation, they operate the Charm City Circulator. It can go into all our fabulous 5 neighborhoods, you know what they are. But for years, we have advocated to get the Charm City Circulator to the Great Blacks and Whites. Where's the equity in that? The Charm City Circulator can go across our city, north, south, east, west, but it can't go into the African American community. It can't service the Great Blacks and Whites. And so I don't think that people who work for these agencies are necessarily looking at some of the things they do on a daily basis. And I heard many of them coming today saying, this is what we're going to do, we're going to plan this, we got this, we got this, we got that. But I think if you look at people who have been heading agencies for decades, and they haven't found a way to do equity in a city like Baltimore by now, I don't know if we can rely on these agencies and their proposed ideas of what they might do. I don't think we can rely on that. And I definitely don't, not knocking the Department of Planning, but I definitely don't think we can put this to be overseen in their hands. In Baltimore County, they have the Office of Fair Practices, and that office oversees every county agency as to where the dollars go, much like our MBE office does for procurement in Baltimore. I think we need an Office of Fair Practices. And I think also the City Council has to be the true oversight. The City Council is who we elected, we voted for, to give equity to the citizens of Baltimore. We put it in your hands to oversee these agencies, not to have them come up and do a song and dance about, hey, 2020, we're going to be doing all these things. We gave you that power, City Council, and we want you to take that power and not to give it to an agency of city government, which itself needs to be looked at for equity. That's the issue I think we have here. So in closing, folks who listen on TV, if you would just look at this year's $3.4 billion budget, you'll find inequities all over the place. You'll find spending millions and billions of dollars all over the place. And who is challenging where that money is going? Anyone? Who's challenging the budget right now among the city council members? Who is saying this is unfair right now? This is the question we have to ask to you because you're the person we asked to represent us. You're our only last hope. The budget's going to be approved in what, 2 or 3 weeks? We need you right now to take a look at this year's budget and find inequities and say we stop it right now. We stop it right now. You have the power. And so lastly, Here's what I would recommend. I would recommend the city create, I know the mayor has budget issues, but I think we need to create an office of fair practices, and right off the top, I think this young lady right here could chair it. She has the ability, she surely has the passion. She's taken on 3 positions today to represent planning, so I just think this bill is a good bill. It may cost some money to implement it, but if you really look at what it has cost us not to have equity, that's what you have to look at. In a city like Baltimore, what does it cost us to not empower citizens who are 3/4 of the budget of the city of Baltimore through paying taxes? The tax that we pay, cell phone tax, recordation tax, transfer tax, gas tax, I mean, Jesus Christ. The citizens of Baltimore tax all the way up and down. And then you say we're the poorest jurisdiction, but we're the highest tax. So it's time for the citizens who are the taxpayers in this city to get some equity. And agencies are going to have to tighten their belt. Maybe they need to take a cut so we can fund this particular thing. How about that? How about a 4% cut for all the city agencies? How about that? How about that? Let's fund this right now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Is there anyone else, a member of the public, who wishes to testify? I want to address a couple of things, and I want to hold off until everyone who is here as a member of the public that is testifying. Specifically, Mr. Fields, to your comments. We enacted the budget on Thursday, June 7th. The mayor signed that budget into law. The things that you're requesting, you referred to, I think, $142 million that's spent on economic development. The budget is probably a 900-page book. Does that sound right, Bob? It is available online. It's published online approximately 2 to 2.5 months prior, maybe a month and a half before the city council passes it and the mayor enacts it. There's a great deal of detail in that book. It includes a number of positions under each agency and each function within that agency, including money that goes to each service. I'll also say that it's my belief, and I'm speaking now in a different role as chair of the City Council's Budget and Appropriations Committee, that we have, for the past 2 years, probably had the most transparent process that the City Council has had when it comes to dealing with the budget. We held 51.5 hours worth of hearings over a 4-day period. We ensured on the council end that each and every single minute of those hearings was televised on Comcast Channel 25 and available to watch live streaming and is open to the public. We advertised the schedule for those hearings 1 month in advance so that citizens could follow that process. I'd also like to point out that the City Council does not have the power to, as you said it, manage agencies. That's a function of the mayor's office as the chief executive of the city. And lastly, we do not have the power to create agencies. That can only be done through charter. That can be initiated one of 2 ways, through a public petition or through a council ordinance, what's known as a mayor and city council resolution. But at the end of the day, we don't have the power to create agencies like the agency which you referred to. In fact, it's the citizens of Baltimore that are the only ones that have that power, and they do that through the ballot. It would be a charter amendment that would end up on the ballot in November. With that, I'd like to pass it over to Councilman Scott for a few brief comments, and then we'll. You're good. All right, colleagues. Councilman Stokes.
Mr. Fields, you mentioned about the circulator, and I just want to mention to you that I just had a conversation with Transportation Choices, and my question was why they only go in certain neighborhoods and not go in the African-American neighborhoods. Also, I introduced a resolution we just had a hearing with support of my colleagues about late payments to subcontractors, and we going to reconvene that to talk about the lawsuits that the city had to pay out because we find out that most subcontractors are not getting paid on time. So I echo exactly what you said. I just wanted to share a comment with you.
Yeah, and there is some agencies that I see get created in Baltimore City within agencies all the time. We just come on, read the newspaper, turn on the news. Department of Transportation says we're going to issue $90 fines. Bam, just like that. We turn on the news, there's an Office of Sustainability, just like that. These are things that's happening right before our eyes. So we want to see that, look guys, we don't want another 2015. We don't want another uprising on Penn North. If we don't get this right, that area is balling still. We got to get this right, and it's up to us to get it right. It's up to us, and that's why we're taking our time. Ms. Hicks, Ms. West, Mr. Dar, coming down here at 5 o'clock. It's almost 6:30. Listen to everybody speak. We could be 1,000 more places. We are interested in our city. We care about our city. We want to see this done right. I done gave you classic examples in this year's budget where equity is not fair. I could go on. There's plenty of them.
Thank you.
Colleagues, at this time, we have amendments on our desks. Those amendments are a product of collaboration between Councilman Scott, the Mayor's Office for Government Relations, the Department of Planning, and the Department of Law. The first amendment, which was requested by the Department of Law, is to delete a part of line 4, specifically, quote, to be developed and overseen by the Department of Planning, end quote. Is there a motion to move that amendment?
So move, Mr. Chair.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Amendment number 2 is to amend part of lines 7 and 8 so that it will now read, quote, prevent and redress those disparate outcomes, defining certain terms, adoption of rules and regulations to carry out this program, requiring certain ... Is there a motion to move that amendment?
So move.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Amendment, that was a Department of Law amendment. I apologize. Amendment number 3, requested by the Department of Law and the Department of Planning jointly, is to delete lines 8 through 10.
Which is the director.
Yeah, we're not inserting anything, right? No, is to delete lines 8 through 10 on page 2. Is there a motion to move that amendment?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Fourth amendment is introduced by Councilman Scott and the Department of Planning. It is to insert a new section C beginning on line 8 on page 2 for a definition of equity, which will be, quote, equity, closing the gaps in policy, practice, and allocation of city resources so that race, gender, religion, sexual orientations, and income do not predict one's success while also improving outcomes for all, end quote. Is there a motion to move that amendment?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
We only have one nay. That motion carries. Amendment number 5, rules and regulations. This was offered up by Department of Law and Department of Planning. It is to delete the entirety of section 39-2, which is lines 21 through 27 on page 2. Is there a motion to move this amendment?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. We'll be skipping over amendment number 6 and leaving those reserved sections of 39-3 through 39-5. Amendment number 7, offered up by Department of Law and Department of Planning. It is to amend the language on lines 30 through 31 on page 2. The new language will read, quote, each city agency shall develop, adopt, and oversee an equity assessment program that requires it to, (,) end quote. Is there a motion to move this amendment?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Amendment number 8 is to insert language at the end of line 31 on page 2. It will read, item A, quote, in the first year following enactment, agencies must participate in training and ongoing capacity building around equity and inclusion to produce a baseline analysis of the equity impacts of the agency's existing and proposed actions and policies encompassing programs, operations, and capital projects. Item B will read, quote, starting in the second year following enactment, all city agencies shall develop an equity assessment program that requires city agencies to, end quote. Is there a motion to move this amendment?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. This motion carries. Amendment number 9, offered up by Councilman Scott, is to add, quote, sexual orientation, end quote, to the end of the newly inserted B1 and B4 respectively. Language in item 1 would read, quote, proactively develop policies, practices, and strategic investments to reverse disparity trends based on race, gender, income, or sexual orientation, end quote. And item number 4 would read, conduct equity assessments of existing and proposed agency actions, policies, and budgets, both capital and operating. Is there a motion to move that amendment?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Amendment number 10 in section 39-7, proposed by Department of Law and Department of Planning, is to delete the entirety of this section. Is there a motion to move this amendment?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Amendment number 11, offered by Councilman Scott, Department of Law, Department of Planning, and the Administration. This is in section 39-8. The new language will read, each agency shall, item number 1, quote, identify an equity coordinator who will be responsible for managing that agency's equity assessment program. The equity coordinator shall report directly to the director of each agency, end quote. Item number 2, quote, conduct equity assessments of the agency's existing and proposed practices and policies, comma, and, end quote. Item number 3, quote, develop and implement a place to address any disparate outcomes based on race, gender, income, or sexual orientation that have been identified by the agency's assessments, end quote. Is there a motion to move that amendment?
So moved.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. That motion carries. Amendment number 12, requested by the Law Department. That is to amend the language in line 33 on page 3. That new language will read, quote, the Director of Planning shall conduct an equity assessment on any proposed capital budget and score the proposed projects based on that assessment. The results of each proposed capital budget shall be published on the Department of Planning's website, end quote. Is there a motion to move that amendment?
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. This motion carries. The next amendment, amendment number 13, and colleagues, I'll note that this is mistakenly labeled amendment number 9 at the bottom of page 2, is to amend language beginning on line 3 and page 4. And that new language will read, quote, on or before June 30 of each year, beginning 1 year after the effective date of the ordinance, agencies shall submit their equity report to the mayor and city council and Department of Legislative Reference for public review and be made available online. City Council may hold hearings to review annual equity reports as warranted. B, the contents. The report shall include 1, an assessment of progress towards achievement of the goals of the equity assessment program, 2, an assessment of the current scope of its compliance, 3, a discussion of any disparate outcomes identified through equity assessments of its existing policies or procedures, 4, recommended steps to address the identified disparate outcomes, and 5, an update on progress towards eliminating previously identified disparities and implementing actions recommended in past reports, end quote. Is there a motion to move this amendment?
So moved.
Second? Second by Clark. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Okay, motion carries. Let's go to you, Hillary, Department of Law. How are you feeling?
That meets form and legal sufficiency.
Department of Law approves and is in support. Outstanding. Karan, on behalf of the Mayor's Office, how are you feeling?
We are okay with all the amendments.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smith, on behalf of Department of Planning, how are you feeling? Okay, can you grab the mic? Are you in support of where things are at now?
Yes, we're in support of the direction that it's shaping into. So we know there's going to be further looks from the council, so we look forward to seeing it evolve, but we feel like it's in a good direction.
Outstanding, thank you. Councilman Scott, from your perspective, where are things at?
I'm very encouraged, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and you're in support of the amendments as is?
Yes,
or the
sir.
amended bill? Kara, on behalf of Council President, can you speak to where the Council President's office is at?
We appreciate all of the amendments that the councilman and his colleagues worked on in the administration, so we're comfortable. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to, before we take a vote, I got a quick comment, and then I'm going to pass it to Councilman Scott. Stephanie, I really want to thank you for all the work that you're doing. We are incredibly lucky to have you working in city government, and I don't mean to steal any of Councilman Scott's thunder, but I suspect this would have been a lot harder to be the architect of without having the work that Stephanie's been doing at the Department of Planning. So thank you, and thank you, Karan, and the Mayor's Office for helping to get everyone together to make sure that we all work together to get amendments that we could all live with and support a bill that we can all be proud of. Thank you to all the city agencies. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Councilman Scott.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, everyone, for being here. I think this is a critical moment. We know that we have a lot of work to do. I think that for me, for us to, as a city, actually say, have cities, agencies actually say throughout the budget process that this is something that they have identified and they know that they have work to do, that means the city has come a long way, at least in my time here in the city government, because to have a city agency actually say before the council, no, we do not consider equity, we have not been doing that, but we should and we shall, is something that shows that we have the promise. We know that this is not going to solve this problem for us overnight. None of us here expect that to happen. I don't expect that to happen in my time in the city government or on city council, but we know that we have to put laws in place that start the conversation, that force us to do things and operate in different ways so that we are not making the same mistakes of the generations before us, be it even if those are unconscious mistakes that we are making. So I am proud to be a sponsor of this bill, proud to stand with my colleagues and thank them for their support and from being here, but also more importantly, proud to have the support of the community, and also recognizing that we still have work to do and that we will reach out to the community as we set forth and have that year of planning and year of how to make this work best for the city of Baltimore. We know that only going to work well, including the citizens of Baltimore. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you again, Councilman, for your leadership on this. Is there a motion to move the bill as amended?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Motion by Scott, second by Clark. Costello is a yes. Clark? Yes. Bullock?
Yes.
Pinkett?
Yes.
Reisinger is absent. Scott?
See.
And Stokes? Yes. This bill passes as amended, 6-0 with one absence, and it moves to second reader on June 25th. Thank you all for coming, and please be sure to bring your take your belongings, and we're now in recess.
Your kids are small, I might not have it that.